This is the talk on liquid gypsums, but I wanted to drill down into exactly what we're putting on when we are putting on gypsum calcium sulphate, specifically in a liquid form. I wrote a piece for a magazine about 3 or 4 years ago, and in it I stated that if I was to go to 500 greenkeepers and ask them what calcium was and what it did for them, I'd get a range of answers from absolutely nothing, don't need it, it's a waste of time, to it's absolutely essential. And I wrote that piece and the phone literally rung off the hook with lots of people saying, actually, what is it and what can it do for me? So over the last 2 or 3 years, we've been drilling down, really just having a really good look at exactly what calcium can do for you, specifically in the form that we sell, which is a liquid calcium. So I've changed the name slightly on the first slide. Calcium, what is it and what does it do? Why do we need it? Calcium is the 5th most abundant element in the Earth's crust while being widely distributed in nature. It's basically everywhere. Every living thing has and depends on calcium in one way, shape or form. The electronic structure of calcium cation makes it unique, the unique element that is ideally suited to assist in plant growth. I think everybody sort of knows and understands that it strengthens the cells, etc., etc. But as I say, during this presentation, we're going to drill down into exactly what the benefits are. In the soil environment, the calcium cation serves 4 basic functions that are critical to plant health and production. In soils, the calcium cation flocculates clay and organic matter particles, which results in improved soil porosity. This ensures adequate soil aeration, which guarantees improved soil drainage and allows correct root growth. Flocculating the soils, taking the fines, binding them together, instead of having lots of fines, bigger particles. The old saying, roots don't grow in the soil, they grow in the spaces in between. So basically flocculating the soil. The soil biological life is the key to beneficial plant nutrition, and it's a fact that biological life has a definite need for the element calcium. The beneficial biology of the soil complex responds very favourably to the porosity of the soil complex, which is provided by the flocculation of the exchange complex provided by the calcium cation. Put your teeth in for that one. Also, soil biology feeds very heavily on available calcium in soil to supply the needs of their bodily functions. Bit of a mouthful, but I think it's worth saying, and it's basically self-explanatory. All plants have a specific need for calcium and their tissue to ensure improved growth. The ability of calcium to neutralise either excess acid or excess alkaline in the soil environment is the key to improved root growth of the plant. Without improved root growth, plants are susceptible to drought and a lack of mineral nutrition. This is a core taken from a golf course that we're treating at the moment, and it's typical of a lot of golf courses that we get involved in. You'll hear the magic number 50 to 75 millimetres. Basically, that's where we tend to see most of the problems in, I'm talking specifically golf greens here that we're treating. This greenkeeper has done all he can with aeration. He's using vertidrain. He's punching holes in at every opportunity, so he's doing everything that we would expect him to do. And yet, here, this 50 to 75 millimetre area is absolutely solid. Take my word for it. You literally have to crunch it together in your fingers. So there's some life going on in the top here. You get to this layer and there's literally nothing going on below. So the roots, the moisture, the nutrition is all being held above that layer, not a lot going on beneath. This is the same course, a different green. That's sort of the 50 millimetre mark, and you can see this is probably 3 or 4 weeks after treating with a liquid calcium sulphate, and you can see there the roots are starting to push their way down through that 50, 75 millimetre layer. And that's simply because the calcium has got in there and flocculated the soil, shifted some of the elements that were holding that root growth back, and they're starting to push those roots down through that layer and into the nutrients that will be available below it. So it's broken up that compacted layer, if you like. So what are we talking about then? Calcium sulphate, gypsum, traditionally in a powdered form, pellets. Nowadays you can get it in a liquid form, and it's basically a calcium sulphate that is suspended in a liquid. My first job as a greenkeeper was going out with a barra, spreading lime, calcium carbonate. Basically it drifted everywhere, not all of it went exactly where you wanted it to. So as I say, now you can buy it in a liquid form. It's suspended in the liquid. You can go out and use it in all your traditional equipment, your sprayers, and it's a nice, easy, safe product to apply. Traditional spreading, as I say, you can see most of that's about to disappear into the field next door. Wouldn't suggest you have that sort of equipment on a golf course, but you can see the point we're trying to make here. As opposed to see that golfers are there. It's a perfectly safe product. You don't have to worry about having people around asking taste after a spell. No dyes needed. There's a white haze left on the green that you can see where you've been. It's quite a heavy product, even when it's diluted, and it's diluted about 5 to 1 in this instance. It's quite a heavy product, so this isn't a windy day, but even on a breezy day, it will settle on the ground and start to work, whereas it's here, you don't have to worry too much about drift. This is being applied at the equivalent of about 40 litres a hectare. Got about a hectare of greens, so it's about 40 litres of actual product. So that's one green treated with a gypsum, if you like, in a liquid form, so calcium sulphate going on to start to flocculate that soil. So what are we talking about when we're talking about a liquid gypsum? Trade name Gypflow. We also sell pH Plus, which is a liquid calcium carbonate, as opposed to the Gypflow calcium sulphate. pH Plus does what it says on the tin. It will raise your pH. So if you have a low pH, you can start to treat that with a liquid calcium carbonate. Gypflow calcium sulphate will not raise your pH. I've had lots of phone calls from people that are using the product, been told by, let's say, other people in the industry, be careful, it will muck around with your pH. Calcium sulphate will not muck around with your pH. It's a pH neutral product. As I say, we've got Gypflow or pH Plus, liquid gypsum and liquid lime. Gypflow, liquid gypsum. So what are we actually putting down? We're putting down 35% calcium. Natural gypsum is typically 23%, so you can already see there that in the liquid form, it's supercharged, if you like. You're getting a lot more calcium going on the ground. 25% sulphur, natural gypsum, typically 18%. So there's more sulphur going in as well. I'll come on to this later on in the presentation, but again, I've heard people say we'd have to be careful with the sulphur. You can OD on sulphur. You can't. You can if you go stupid, but it's in there for a specific reason, and that's to make sodiums and chlorides more leachable. And as I say, I'll explain that a little bit more in the presentation. Average particle size, 5 microns. Natural gypsum, 1,000 microns. You have to be quite focused when you're buying products like these. You're basically putting down, as I say, particles, even though we're in a liquid. And 5 microns is where you need to be aiming, or lower. It will act a lot quicker in the soil. It will be far more mobile in the soil. So I can't stress enough how important it is when you're buying these sorts of products to focus in on the micron size, so you are getting more bang for your buck. Applied via irrigation or conventional sprayer. In this industry, it will be conventional sprayer. We also do a lot of work with fruit growers, and they have very specific irrigation systems where they can put the products into the irrigation system, and you'll realise why I've told you that in a minute. It's highly available to the soil and the plant. If you were to apply a natural gypsum, you can wait typically 6 to 9 months before that calcium breaks down and is available or active in the soil, if you like. In this form, it starts to break down immediately, and it's immediately working on the soil. There's immediate benefits for you. There's not a lot of point in putting something down, or you're going to wait 6 to 9 months for it to work. As I say, we need it to work straight away on specific problems. So what's it targeting? What should you be using a liquid gypsum for? Typically, as I say, most of the people that we get involved with, you're flocculating fine soil particles and bacteria. If you read a lot of the textbooks, it will say that gypsum will not flocculate sand soils. Correct, it won't flocculate sand, but there's a lot more going on in sand than just sand itself. There's a lot of fines in there that calcium sulphate will start to flocculate, including bacteria and fungi. Flushing of unwanted and unusable elements. There's a lot in the soil that the plant simply can't use. It's sitting there clogging up the soil. Again, I'll come on to a couple of slides later where we can demonstrate that. And what calcium sulphate will do is make that leachable and flush it out of the soil, so that what you're putting on is doing exactly what you need it to, rather than being unusable for the plant. FE clogging, again, a lot of the greens that we treat, when you take a profile, you'll see around this 50 to 75 mil mark, a little orange layer forming where ions are just building up and again adding to that, that layer where nothing can get through. So it will basically make that leachable and flush that through. Increased fungal activity. We're looking to improve the soil to get the fungal activity and the bacterial activity going. Black layer. I don't think there are many greens that we get involved in that haven't got black layer forming in one way, shape or form. The anaerobic layer, lack of oxygen in the soil where it starts to lie wet and becomes quite smelly, and it will inhibit root growth. We're looking to promote beneficial bacteria and increase root development. Ultimately, all of the above leading to better surface performance. We're basically trying to make your soil work for you, not against you. One particular greenkeeper I visited last year, he said, "Look, Andy, I'm throwing nutrients at these greens like they're going out of fashion. I get some sort of a reaction straight away. They go green, and yes, I get some improvement. 2 or 3 weeks later, they're yellowing off again. Haven't had a lot of rain, don't know what's going on. The plants simply aren't taking up these nutrients. And I class that as the soil working against you rather than for you. And as I say, we're helping him as we speak. Increased beneficial grasses. You can change the grass species that are growing by improving the fungal and the bacterial activity. And again, I'll come on to a couple of explanations for that later on. Course manager or greenkeeper recognition. At the end of the day, that's why we're doing it, to produce some good golf greens, bowls greens, etc., for golf course recognition. That's what we're looking for. Doesn't pay the bills, but it does half help. So, the symptoms. Most of the people that phone us and ask us to go along and have a look, moisture retention in the top 50 mil of the profile. Again, that compacted layer just inhibiting the moisture going through deeper down into the profile. So we'll be typically putting moisture meters into greens, and we'll be seeing sort of 20–25% moisture in the top 50 mil, break through that 50 mil, and you're going down to sort of 5 to 10%. So that moisture being held up in the top 50 mil. Nutrient lockup, as I explained, nutrients not really doing what they should be doing, and you're having to apply a lot more of them just to achieve your goals. The anaerobic layer formation, the black layer, evidence of ion clogging, dry, dead soil below that 50 mil mark. You saw in the previous slide, and there'll be a couple more coming up, literally nothing going on below that sort of 50 mil mark. So what are the benefits to using a liquid gypsum? Reduced application of expensive treatments such as wetting agents. Not a wetting agent bashing session at all. They are useful, but as I say, most of the greens that we're treating have had wetting agents applied to them for many, many years, and the problems are still there. And I class it as wetting agents pushing water around a problem rather than actually curing a problem. Increased effectiveness and reduced application rates of nutrients. Touched on that, making the nutrients that you're putting on actually work for you. Increased drought resistance. It stands to reason that if you've got a profile that's holding water through the profile evenly, that you'll have some increased drought resistance. The even distribution of the moisture through the profile is what we're trying to achieve. Flocculation of soils and bacteria, healthier sward, increased density of desirable grasses. Again, I'll come on to it later, but you can start to see a change if you change the fungal and bacterial activity of desirable grasses pollinating your surfaces. Strengthening of the plant cells through increased calcium uptake. Greater disease resistance. Reduced costs. Pennies are hard to come by. If you can reduce costs, take out some of the expensive wetting agents, reduce your inputs, obviously you're going to reduce costs. Yes, there is an expense to applying a liquid gypsum, but what we're ultimately trying to achieve is to reduce cost in other areas. As I said earlier, we do a fair bit of work with fruit growers, specifically soft fruit growers, and I thought it important to add this in because what they basically do is they will take snapshots of what's going on in their soil on a regular basis, fortnightly also. So they can see exactly what their plants need, what they require, and they will tackle that accordingly. This particular fruit grower is using liquid gypsum to tackle a sodium and a chloride problem. And that's basically because he's growing soft fruit, and once these elements start to build up in the profile, they will start to inhibit that plant taking up calcium, taking up nitrates. The plant basically will shut down because of the build-up of sodium and chloride. And I've included it because they basically apply, and then 7 days later they'll take another sample just so they can see what's going on. And this gives you a snapshot of what's going on in your soil, albeit on a quite microscopic level. So you can see there, he's got the sodium level there of 88.7, and a chloride level of 59.8. This sample was taken 2 or 3 days before an application of GypFlow. Remember the 88 and the 59. This was taken 7 days after the application, and you can see that sodium level there has dropped down to below 12, and the chloride level dropped down to 8. As I say, that gives you a real microscopic snapshot of what goes on when you apply a liquid calcium sulphate to your ground. The same thing will be going on but obviously we don't take samples like this and drill down into the figures as much as a fruit grower does. He has to, because he's producing something that we're obviously going to eat. But as I say, it gives you a real insight as to exactly what's going on. We started to see lots of changes, not just flocculation of soil, but some sward changes, as I said earlier, some annual meadowgrass starting to recede in greens, and we wanted to have a look and really drill down as to exactly why that was. We knew and understood the flocculation properties of calcium sulphate, but we wanted to drill down and see what was going on. So we had some fungal and bacterial samples done. The 2014 figures there is prior to treating, and these are golf greens that we're treating. And we started to see some big fat zeros appearing. We took a few samples of other greens that weren't performing, and the same sort of pattern was occurring. The bacterial and the fungal activity was more or less zero, and we sort of thought, well, there must be some sort of link there between the sward changes and the improvement in performance, and we could see that we were getting some changes going on, not just flocculating the soil. So we applied, and still are applying, liquid calcium sulphate to these greens. Took another sample in 2015, and you can see that these zeros start to change into some meaningful numbers. So basically, by flushing out the inhibitors, the sodiums and the chlorides, you can see that there are some bacterial and fungal changes going on that are helping this soil work for you rather than against you. Fungi and bacteria form the building blocks of the whole food chain. Teaching you to suck eggs probably here, but it's a fact. If you've got some healthy fungal and bacterial activity going on, and if you can manipulate that by using calciums, then it can only work for you. Working together, all of these microbes and organisms ensure a constant supply of nutrients for the plant. Free fertilizer. They will run around doing your job for you. We've introduced the boom and bust fertilizer cycle, whereas they promote a sustainable nutrient availability in the soil. If you've got a healthy bacterial fungal activity going on, they can do your job for you to a certain extent. Fungi and bacteria help keep a healthy sward and protect the grass from disease. So what? When I first got into sales, the guy who was teaching me said, always be prepared for the so what question, and it's so true. Fungi also often build special hyphal structures known as rhizomorphs that allow for a very efficient transfer of nutrients from the areas where the nutrients are being taken up back to the plant root. In addition to extending the root system, fungal hyphae are often much smaller in diameter than roots, which allows them to access nutrients and water in the small soil pores. This latter mechanism effectively increases the soil volume exploited by the plant. Fungi have higher surface to volume ratios than roots, which increases the rate at which nutrients are absorbed. Again, a bit of a mouthful, but self-explanatory. It's free fertilizer. So to back that up, this is a diagram of the mycorrhizosphere functioning, as opposed to on the left. Not, as I say, it is a diagram, it's not a picture, but it gives you a good insight as to what you've got if you've got that mycorrhizosphere working, if you've flushed out the elements that are inhibiting those, and you've grown a healthy population. They're in there working for you and increasing the nutrients that your plant can take up. Again, a golf green that we're involved in treating, and you can see a little bit of activity up here, but basically this is a USGA spec, or close to a USGA spec, and most of that, this has been stretched slightly, so slightly deformed, but you can see that down here there's basically nothing going on, and that would break off at about that, again, magic 50 mil layer. Up here not a lot going on, and that greenkeeper is having to throw nutrients at those greens just to keep them functioning. And I would class this as a green that is working against him rather than for him. Again, demonstrating that same break-off point. We've got some activity going on up here, bit of black layer forming. You can see little splatterings of iron, but again, breaking off around that 50, 75 mil layer, and not a lot going on underneath. So just transferring that into what you guys will see on a daily basis, we took a snapshot of a green that is or hasn't been performing properly for a greenkeeper. He's basically limited to using a small portion of this green because the back is basically dead. When it gets wet, it gets very wet, and when it gets dry, it gets very dry. So you've got bone dry soil, which is limiting growth, irregular growth, and fairy rings forming. This is in July 2014. He has undertaken, or is undertaking, a GipFlow liquid gypsum application. This is in August 2014, again very dry. You can see lots of dead grass in there, again fairy rings. So, you know, something's not quite right there. There isn't a balance of soil fungal activity going on. Again, September 2016, this has had a couple of applications now of liquid gypsum. You can see the fairy rings, the dead soil. We now move on to January 2016, and you can see the fairy ring activity fading. He's got a fungal attack here, a bit of fusarium going on, but he's starting to see the coloration of the green evening out. All he's changed is stopped using wetting agents and started using calcium sulphate, liquid gypsum. This is November, quite recently. He called me up, said, Andy, come down and have a look at what we've got here. He's now starting to see an even grass cover. You can see front of the green and the back of the green fairly even. He's got grass growing throughout. And the moisture levels are now even through the profile. No wetting agents are used. I made the comment that I thought wetting agents pushed water around a problem rather than cured it. As I say, he stopped using the wetting agents on here, and I'm not knocking wetting agents, honestly. But what he's seeing now is an even distribution of the moisture through the profile. So why are sward changes occurring? Research shows that annual meadowgrass and Poa annua does not associate positively with mycorrhizal fungi. An increased population of mycorrhizal fungi helps reduce Poa annua and encourages more desirable grasses. Analysis from soils supporting Poa annua swards indicate a bacterial population about 10 times greater than fungal population. So there's an imbalance in there that we're trying to target. But soil that supports old established fescues, bent and ryegrass show an evenly balanced fungal and bacterial biomass. So again, we're trying to promote an even distribution of fungal and bacterial activity. Our trials show a sudden sustained increase in agrostis and fescues, along with a degradation of thatch when fungal populations increase. So, as I say, the calcium working in the soil, promoting bacterial and fungal activity, is basically starting to change the environment and change the sward. Calcium is a proven catalyst for most plant functions. Strip out unwanted, unusable elements in the profile, allowing improved performance. Going back to the fruit growers, as I say, they take a snapshot of exactly what's going on. They see what's inhibiting the soil, what's stopping their plant from performing, and they strip it out with the calcium sulphate liquid gypsum application. Alleviate the need for excessive use of expensive wetting agents. I'll stress again, I'm not knocking wetting agents, but I do see them as an expensive use of your resources when you can cure a problem rather than just push water around it. Allow the bacteria and fungi to feed your plant for you. Basically, that's what happened before we started mucking around and throwing fertilisers on. Take a leaf out of the fruit grower's book and see what your plant needs rather than just applying what you think it needs. Soil testing nowadays isn't expensive, and you can, as I say, take a snapshot just like the fruit growers do and have a look and see exactly what your plant needs, and you can strip out the unwanted elements by using calciums so that you can feed your plant exactly what it needs. Have a look at what science and the experience of others in your position points to. As I say, the fruit growers, I keep banging on about them, but it's quite an exciting market for us to be involved in because they really do drill down on exactly what's going on underneath, as opposed to in our industry, sometimes we don't. What we do directly affects the performance of the soil and ultimately the plant. Basically, what we're saying is, with the fruit growers and with us, if your computer was clogged up with stuff that was just inhibiting what it did, just like your greens might be clogged up with elements inhibiting what goes on, hit the reset button. You can strip it back and start again. Sounds dramatic. It's not. It's taking out the elements that are in the soil that are inhibiting what's going on, giving you situations where you have to start applying lots of nutrients, wetting agents, etc., etc. You can hit the reset button, strip those out, and start again with a calcium sulphate application. That's the end of my presentation. If you've got any questions, quite happy to take them now. We are on stand C10. If you want to come down there and chat to us, more than welcome to entertain that. I've got some brochures here as well, if anybody would like to take one. Thank you for listening. As I say, if anybody's got a question, quite happy to tackle it now. It's a good question, actually. They can specifically target what they're putting on. So whereas on a golf green we'd be looking at 40 litres a hectare, 50 litres a hectare, they literally nowadays grow in what we call tabletop. So they'll have a grow bag with the product, with the plant rather in, and they'll be grown in coir, and they'll have a drip going straight in so they can target exactly what's going on. And they will target a hectare at 10 litres. But as I say, they can specifically point that right to the root of the plant and flush out from the root back. So they can really reduce the levels that they apply at. If they were, and a lot of growers don't do this anymore, if they were growing in the soil and they were spraying on, they'd need to go on at the same sort of levels that we do in this industry, 40 litres, 50 litres a hectare. A fruit grower would be doing it as and when they need. As I say, they would take a sample. In our industry, we're looking at once, twice a year, start of the season and at the end of the season, flushing through. We have a few customers that do it on a monthly basis, and they'll reduce the application rate so they're not giving it a hit at the start and a hit at the end, and they'll do sort of 15, 20 litres every other month or every month, as and when they need it. As I say, we're not in the industry to spend money if you don't need to spend it, and if your soil analysis is showing that you're seeing some improvement from it, then you don't need to apply it. But typically, start of the growing season and the end of the growing season.
Is it tank mixable?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, you do have to be a little bit careful, and again, if you come on the stand, I'll show you some data, but we are seeing that a lot of greenkeepers don't test their water, don't have a look at what's going on in the water. The reason the fruit growers are having to apply it, because the water they're pumping on is putting sodium and chloride back in, so in the water they've got the sodium and chloride. Well, hey-ho, so have we. we're putting on a lot of that sort of stuff in our water as well. And I know we'll use reservoirs or tap water or whatever, but if you have a look at what you're putting on a lot of that stuff as well. So that will give you a good snapshot if you have a look at what you're putting on in your water as to how you are adjusting those levels yourselves. So if you're pumping lots of sodium on for a bad borehole, or you've simply got sodium in your tap water, then obviously you're going to benefit from a more regular application. We've not found anything it doesn't mix with, so you can mix it with anything else you're putting on, a fungicide or anything. I would also, I would make sure you do a bucket test just to make sure, but we've not found anything. I'll tell a lie, we've found one product that it will coagulate with, because that's basically what it does. It will start flocculating in the mix rather than in the soil. So again, a bucket test, normal practices that we all do. Good question. We've found that the benefits are accelerated if you put it on just before a storm. Rainwater washing it in is a lot better than your irrigation water washing it in. So you don't have to, it's not essential. It will sit there and start to work anyway, but if you can time it just before a storm, the benefits are increased quite dramatically. We do have customers that will go out and soil roll and just break up the surface prior to application. Again, you're just helping that get into the soil. It's not essential, but it will help.
If you've got a sodium-affected irrigation system, can you use it through fertigation?
Yeah, if you've got that facility, if you want to put it into your irrigation system, yeah, that's basically what the growers will do.
What about the cost? Is it cost prohibitive through fertigation?
It depends on application rates. That's a good question. Yeah, what we're finding is if you've got that problem around the 50 mil mark, once you've broken that up, get the bacteria and the fungal activity going, that will start to do your job for you. Then you're basically looking at a situation where you're managing your calcium levels rather than trying to flocculate and flush anything through. These guys, the fruit growers specifically, will be putting the product on anyway to boost calcium levels once they've got rid of the sodium and the chloride. But we've not found any depth. It doesn't work. I mean, listen, if you've got 12 inches below your root zone, you've got a clay base, you're not going to start shifting that with an application of calcium sulphate. I'd be a fool if I stood here and said that would work. But what you will do is you'll start to work on, I guarantee most of the problems that you guys will see will be around that 50, 75 mil mark. We do have some guys that are treating greens that are sitting on a clay base, and that's basically gradually working away at that clay and getting the water moving through it. As I say, it's not a silver bullet for a green that's an old push-up sitting on clay. I wish it was. I'd be a very wealthy man and you'd all have some lovely greens. But so around the 50, 75 mil mark is where it works best. Once you've broke that down, it will work through the profile. Brilliant. Thank you very much. I hope to see you on stand C10.